So today we present you our biofilm webinar. We will discuss about it. We will know it. We will know what is it, how it is formed, how it affects us, and at the end we will know how to fight it. Okay. Also, the planning of this webinar is gonna be like the previous one. We will at the end we will answer your questions. So we ask you to write them on the chat. Maybe at the end we will be able to read them and answer them. And if as we have a limited time, so if we don't answer live your questions, we will personally write them by email to you, okay? The next day. So I stop talking. Let's start with the webinar. I'm gonna present my colleague, Luis Granado. He is our technical salesperson for America, Africa, and Middle East countries. So he's a vet surgeon. He's specialized in biology, and he's also nutrition specialist, and he also worked in the United Kingdom for 3 years. So, Luis, I'm gonna enable you to see. One moment. Okay, how can I do it? Like this. Like this. And now you are the host.
There we go. Here we are. Hello, Carlos. Hello, everyone. 6 years I was in the UK. Carlos, you said 3. It was 6 for me. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for attending this second webinar. I want to wish you a very happy new year to everyone, with plenty of health. I know this year is gonna be better for everyone. And I want to apologize because I have been having a really bad throat for the last 10 days. So you might have to wait a few seconds for me to drink a little bit of water, and hopefully I won't lose my voice. So fingers crossed for that. But yeah, it will be fine, I'm sure. So we are going to start with the second webinar about biofilm. I will try to stick to the time because this one is a little bit longer. So let's quickly start with it. Let me share the screen. Carlos, can you confirm that everything is fine there?
Yeah, everything is fine.
Okay. Great. So, as Carlos already explained, we are going to talk about biofilm, how it is going to affect us, both for water treatment and the water pipelines, and also for cleaning and disinfection. This is very important because we might think that biofilm is only going to affect us, and it will mainly do it on the pipes and water system. But we have to also bear in mind that it is a very important thing for the cleaning and disinfection to be efficient in all of our process. So the different points that we are going to see during this chat. First, we will understand what biofilm is in a more complex way than what we normally deal with. Because as you remember, all of you that were in the first webinar, we talk a little bit about it, but today we are going to get into more detail. So we will explain how it gets formed, because we need to know how it happens, to know why it is important and how it is going to affect us. What are the predisposing factors? This is a very important point today, probably the most out of all of them, and how it will affect us, and finally, how we can fight it. So these are different pictures of biofilm that some of our customers have been sharing with us. I think most of them are coming from South America, but it's happening the same everywhere. So these are real examples, but as I already said, I don't want you to just get the idea of biofilm happening inside of the pipes, because it will happen absolutely on every kind of surface, and we have to bear that in mind. We can define biofilm as a microbiological ecosystem which is adhered to a surface, forming a layer or a film, and which is characterized for being able to secrete a mucopolysaccharides that can cover the film and basically protect it. So basically, it will always be an ecosystem which is going to be adhered to a surface and will have this characteristic mucus appearance that we can't even feel if we touch it, right? Probably most of you have seen it and touched it, and you can feel like a slimy material. And as well, it's very slippery, the whole surface that creates, and this slippery factor is due to the mucopolysaccharides. This microbiological population is formed by different species. This is very important to understand as well. Although there could be a certain cases of monofilm, and later on we will explain about one of them, where there is just only one microorganism causing the film. The common case is that there is plenty of species, even involving different fungi, viruses, yeast, and different bacteria within the same biofilm, right? We have to understand biofilm as an ecosystem where the microbiological population is interacting inwardly, but also with the surrounding environment. And this is very important. This idea is very important as well, as we will have to understand that the conditions in the surrounding environment will be affected and will be changed. So we can say that the biofilm will modify the surrounding conditions as well, and we will see why this is important. So, during the time, it was thought that the bacteria were found isolated or independent from each other on the environment, right? In 1997, Frank and Coles did a study and found that most of them were found forming large slimy colonies, right? And they were having relations within them. So that is the way we will normally find them on the environment, the bacteria. Against what it was thought in the past. For its formation, they need a hydrated environment and a minimum of nutritional supply. The biofilm, I mean. It's not that they need a very, very enriched environment, but they do need some kind of humidity and a little bit of nutrition as well. Normally, with the humidity for it to grow, the environmental humidity will be more than enough, so it's quite easy to get formed. We will find more presence of biofilms as well on surface from farms that we clean on a humid weather than the ones on dry places with low humidity. But this is just a geographical fact depending on where we are from. Obviously, in warm and humid countries, there will be more presence of biofilm than in dry and cold. One of the characteristics, as we have already said, is that mucopolysaccharides layer. And the thing with this layer is that it's not perfectly known yet, right? But we know that this is a matrix with different kind of elements. And its main role, this is very important, the purpose of it is to provide protection against the biocides and the drying, right? It's very important because the sun could dry the biofilm, but obviously this layer is going to protect it. And also it's very important to retain the nutrients for the microorganisms, right? Biofilm, as you can imagine, is very resistant to drying up because of this layer. So basically, this is how biofilm normally starts, right? Let's see step by step. So obviously, on the first stage, we have 3 planktonic cells, which are going to be arriving, and they will be sticking to the surface. Then they will multiply themselves and grow for later on starting to secrete this mucopolysaccharides layer, and then they will turn into a mature biofilm with the different characteristics that we will see. So just stick to the idea that it's going to be a whole process that can start with just 1 or a few isolated cells, and we will see how it gets formed. So the first step is going to be the retrofit or colonization of the surface by these bacteria. Then we will have the absorption of or fixation, that can be reversible or irreversible, and we will see in a moment what that means, because this is very important. And for last, we will have the development and maturation of the biofilm. So on the retrofit, as we already said, the bacteria reach the surface. And bear in mind, again, I will say it a few more times, that we are not only talking about pipes, we are talking about any kind of surface. So these bacteria are arriving and they are going to place themselves on the surface. The environmental conditions, they have to do a lot with its adhesion capacity, but also inherent factors from each bacteria, like genetical factors, because within the same group of bacteria, there are different strains with greater capacity to produce certain proteins that will help them to stick to the surface. So then once the bacteria have arrived, the absorption and fixation will happen. That, as we said, will be reversible in the beginning to lately become irreversible. Firstly, there is a weak reversible union based on van der Waals forces, electrostatic forces, or just hydrophobic reactions, right? In this stage, certain environmental changes, such as pressure change, will be enough to literally just drag the microorganisms from the surface. So at that point, it's fine. We can consider that it's quite easy to remove yet. But lately, the irreversible fixation will happen. And this is going to be time depending. During this stage, it won't be easy any longer to remove and drag the microorganisms. On the contrary, it will be quite difficult. Maybe with a strong drying during time, it could happen, but in natural conditions, it will not happen, and it will be very, very difficult to remove it, right? So this irreversible one is based on different fixations from the bacteria to the surface, and will also depend on the capacity of the bacteria to create these stronger bindings to the surface. Probably, in regards to this, the most important is to know at this point that going from reversible to irreversible is quite a fast process, right? Normally, we are going to think or have the feeling that biofilms happen after months of working or really long periods of time, but this is not true. According to different studies, these unions go from reversible to irreversible from literally 20 minutes to 4 hours in conditions from 4 to 20 degrees. So that's quite an easy condition to be. It's not something that we are not going to find. Obviously, this will also depend on the predisposing factors that we will see and on the bacterial species that we will find. But just bear in mind that it's quite a fast process, right? Let me pass. So once we have an irreversible union, later on we will have the developing and maturation phase. We are going from an early biofilm, which has already modified environmental conditions from the surface, and will allow different species to adhere to itself, new microorganisms coming. This is very important to create the ecosystem that we were talking about previously. The surface conditions have already changed, and certain bacteria, which initially wouldn't be able to adhere to it, now they find it very easy under these new conditions modified by the biofilm. So we have to think that some bacteria that probably won't be getting into a biofilm or adhering to any surface in the beginning, now under these new conditions, they find it easy and they will just stick to it. So this, for example, is the case of Listeria, which has been proved to have a greater capacity to be in biofilms if there is Pseudomonas previously in that biofilm, right? This happens because Pseudomonas is a bacteria with a great capacity to create new biofilms, as we will see later on. And the conditions that generates in the environment are very suitable for a subsequent Listeria colonization. We have to understand that different synergetic reactions happen within different bacteria when colonizing the surfaces. So what is going to happen next? So the biofilm has been developing, has modified the surrounding conditions, and we are going to see that as long as it grows and gets mature, there will be a differentiation on the whole metabolicity of the biofilm, right? The metabolic activity will change, and we will explain that as well. Mature biofilm, which is larger in shape, has got a smaller percentage in bacteria than the early biofilm, right? That means that once it's mature, the matrix represents the greater proportion and normally consists on dead cells, the mucopolysaccharides that we were talking before, and water. There are interstices with water in it. So here, what we don't see, but I will explain, is what I just mentioned before. And we will have a differentiated metabolic pattern within the same biofilm, right? On the surface, I mean the outer part of the biofilm, not the surface of adhesion. So imagine the biofilm, the part which is stick to a surface, not the distant part from that. We will have the most active metabolism in there, which we will find an aerobic metabolism. In the case of both, just the surface or just inside of a pipe, depending on where the biofilm is happening. These bacteria will be in direct contact with the oxygen in the air or with the water if we are in the pipes. However, in the deeper part of the biofilm, which is the one that is going to be in contact with the surface of adhesion, the capacity to get oxygen and nutrients, both of them, is way more limited. And that is why we will have a slower metabolism, and it will generally be anaerobic in there, right? So this is important to realize that as long as the biofilm develops, the environment surrounding will get modified. But also inside of the biofilm, the conditions are very different from the inside to the outside of it. This is important to understand how the biofilm is a multi-species ecosystem, as we said before, and how it becomes a great reservoir for much of a number of microorganisms that would never be able to grow under different circumstances. Carlos, I see that some people are just raising hands. Not sure if there is something wrong with...
Yeah, Luis, I'm working on it, okay? Because
okay.
Yeah, you can continue, and I'm working on it.
Okay. So I will carry on. Why is this not moving? There we go. So this is the case, for example, in the deeper parts that we were talking with anaerobic metabolisms, where we normally will find Salmonella and Clostridium. These two bacteria, they will settle there. Clostridium is unstrict anaerobic, and by itself, it would never generate biofilm. We have to know that Clostridium, if it was himself, he will never do a biofilm, unless we have an iron-enriched water, as we will talk quickly later on as well, but don't worry about that now. So Clostridium is going to feel much more comfortable in these deeper parts due to the lack of oxygen, and that's where it will grow. Also, the same will happen with Salmonella. Salmonella, which is a facultatively aerobic bacteria, it will find itself comfortable as well in this anaerobic environment. So what happens? These pathogenic microorganisms are going to be well protected in this deepest part of the biofilm from the action of any kind of treatment that we use for cleaning and disinfection of the surfaces, and also from any water treatment. Sorry. So where are we going to find it? We said before that it will occur on any kind of surfaces, pipes, cleaning surfaces, building, walls, ceiling, drinkers, etc. So biofilm can be generated everywhere, even on the surface of the animals. Anywhere where there is a small quantity of nutrients and humidity, we can find biofilm. So now we are going to talk about what are the predisposing factors. As I said before, this might be the most important part of the chat, because we have already understood what biofilm is, how it develops, what are the metabolic differences, and how it is going to affect us. Also, we talk about the time, very important for these unions to go irreversible. So we have the concept of the short time we need to have a problem with biofilm, right? But now we have to know, especially those who work directly inside of the farms, all the factors that can lead us to have these kind of problems. We talk about two types in general terms, which are environmental conditions, where there is not much that we can do, as it could be the kind of water, the physical-chemical characteristics, environmental temperature, and so on. And then the ones we can generate by handling, because we ourselves, we can influence as well in generating the biofilm, right? But I prefer this way of classifying the predisposing factors, which are nutritional substances, surfaces, temperature, water flow, initial organic load, and the way of applying substances into the water. And then we are going to go through them slowly, right? So talking about them in more detail, one of the most important are the nutritional substances, right? These are generally substances that we will add. Sorry, Carlos, I think again. Okay, I think it's fine now. Okay. Yeah, so the most important are the nutritional substances that we are going to add into the water. And it is going to affect us because normally, as I said, we just put them into the water for it to go into the animals, and therefore it will affect to our pipes, drinkers, and the whole water system, right? Sugars and molasses, which are very interesting for nutritional purposes for our animals and our production. They are also very interesting, as you can imagine, for the microorganisms that we could find. With the vitamins, we have to know that all those vitamin E complements that we add into the water are very likely as well to provoke biofilm. I don't mean that they are bad at all. They are fine. I just want to say that they are a great predisposing factor, and we will have to bear this in mind. But don't get me wrong, they are okay. We need them, and it's good because we get good things when we are using them, right? Also, the adjuvants that we find on the antibiotics, it is not the antibiotic itself, but the adjuvant. And if we read carefully the leaflets that come with the antibiotics, we will see that so many times they come with essential amino acids as an excipient, right? And that will be as well a precursor of biofilm. Organic acids as well. And here I want to make clear that it is only the organic ones, not the inorganic. And this is because organic ones provide nutrition for so many bacteria as well. Even though they will disfavor the growth of many pathogenic bacteria, it will ease the growth of some other ones that initially won't be pathogenic, but they will generate this biofilm. And as we have seen, this biofilm will be modifying the environment, so the other pathogenic bacteria will be able to come and attach to it later on. So all of this that we can add, but also we have to bear in mind the iron. So many times we will find iron in our old pipelines or even on some surfaces. It can also come from the source of water in a natural way. It can generate biofilm as well, that we know as the iron biofilm with sulfite reducing bacteria. Again, we will talk about that a bit later. And on the same way, we sometimes need iron to be added as well as a nutritional support for our animals. And you have to know that this iron is likely to generate biofilm, right? So now we know all the nutritional predisposing factors. Let's move into the surfaces, right? So the kind of surface is obviously a very important factor. There is a difference between hydrophilic and hydrophobic surfaces. The hydrophilic ones, which could be glass, it has been proved that the colonies grow in layers, more or less tidy, right? While within the hydrophobic ones, like could be nylon or some sort of plastics, the colonies grow more like in groups, a bit more untidy, more disorder. And the surface is going to determine the adhesion capacity. But the most important thing in regards to surfaces are going in all the surfaces that we will find in our farms or our food premises is going to be the difference between smooth and rough surfaces, right? With the smooth surfaces, which normally are newer, made from stainless steel or PVC plastics, you can imagine that it will make it more difficult for the microorganisms to just stick to them. Rough surfaces, which sometimes used to be smooth and just after time and use, they become rough. And this is easy to see on, especially on drinkers after all the birds have been pecking there for time, are easier for the bacteria to stick to it and therefore to generate this biofilm. But what we are going to find generally is that this roughness in the pipes, drinkers, etc., is due to the precipitation of calcium and magnesium. This is going to make hard waters as well a predisposing factor to create biofilm, right? Concrete as well, which is widely used, is a really bad surface if we want to avoid biofilm. But the reality is that we find it quite a lot, especially in the farms. It makes a very porous floors and walls, but now we have some sort of anti-adherent substances that we can add to it, or even paint it with these epoxy paints that will make it smooth, and at least is helping us and is improving the whole thing a little bit. But you have to bear in mind that concrete is probably not the best surface if we want to avoid biofilm. Another factor to bear in mind is the temperature, right? The environmental one so far is difficult for us to modify, but we have to know that in tropical and warm countries, we will find more biofilm-related problems than obviously in cold countries. I remember when I used to work in the north of England, there were no microbiological problems at all with the water nor the biofilm during the winter. But be careful, because obviously there was no problem in any place which was exposed to the outside temperature, but then when we were going into the inside temperature, we will find a warmer environment, so we can still have the problem there. So remember that for biofilm, the colder, the better, both environmental and drinking water. Another one, the water flow is obviously another factor to be aware of. And how is this going to affect us? So We know perfectly that in line cage laying hens, where there are more water lines per animal than, for instance, in broilers, the water flow is going to be significantly lower, right? So the risk of having biofilm will be higher. Within broilers, it would happen the same with the young chicks, where the water consumption is not that high, so the water flow is going to be is not going to be high compared with other birds. So we have to know that as lower water flow will be more likely to develop biofilm. So, for instance, don't add any nutritional substances into the water during the first days of the chicks to put different predisposing factors together. So this is a reason to know all of them, to try to avoid, or at least don't put them together. In these sort of cases, we recommend to perform regular flushings in order to increase the water flow, right? So that will help us a little bit. Another one, the initial microbiological load is extremely important because it is going to establish the quantity of microorganisms that we will get in a planktonic way into our system. And as we have seen, this is the first stage to generate the biofilm. Obviously, with 0 in the microbiological load, then it would be hardly impossible to generate biofilm inside of a pipe. But the reality that we know is that 0 is also hardly impossible to find. But bear in mind that we are not only referring to the intake of live microorganisms, but also this microbiological load will supply nutrition for other microorganisms, like it could be algae or even other bacteria, right? Then we have to be very careful with those ponds that we can find and the open deposits as well, where the algae can grow. We talked about that already on the previous webinar. So you know a little bit about it now. So many times there is no need to have all the water completely green to have algae there, and we don't even realize that we have them. And this algae will be releasing certain microorganisms into the water and will be likely to generate biofilm as well. Obviously, there are different bacteria, as we already said before, which are more or less likely to generate biofilm, right? Even within the same group, there are different strains with a greater capacity for it. But the main ones are especially Pseudomonas, Enterobacter, Alcaligens, Staphylococcus, and Bacillus, right? Also Listeria, although we saw before that if there was Pseudomonas, its capacity was much higher. By itself, it has got a certain capacity as well. There are so many pathogens with no capacity to generate biofilm by themselves, but we already said they don't have this capacity to generate it, but they will find mature biofilm very suitable for them to be placed. So that having a bacteria that doesn't have this capacity doesn't mean that we are not going to find it within the biofilm. And we have mentioned before the iron biofilm. You can see in the picture, this is a real picture as well from one of our clients, the water having this kind of reddish color. And then we have the iron in there, right? As I said before, this iron is going to generate a specific type of biofilm, which is rich in sulfite-reducing bacteria. They will proliferate very easy in there. If we find our water, if we find a water this kind of reddish color, then we have to know that most likely we will find Clostridium. It will be very likely to find Salmonella as well in that water. So after knowing the predisposing factors, let's see how the biofilm is going to affect us. The most important, although we will get into more detail later on, with some of them will be a recontamination of the drinking waters, water pipelines blockages. It will be a reservoir for pathogenic microorganisms, the bacterial resistances that we will talk later on as well. The biofilm can create inhibitory substances like the beta-lactamase, which will be fighting against the beta-lactamic antibiotics. It can cause flocculation of different substances that we are adding into the water. They can flocculate because of the biofilm. And biofilm itself, it can create some certain amount of corrosion as well, right? So, sorry. Let's get into a bit more of detail with some of them. So what is going to happen? The mucopolysaccharide layer that we explained before has got a very low permeability and it is very difficult to detach, right? This is quite easy to see with that green mucous substances that grows on dark and wet places. I'm sure most of us we have seen. Maybe some of us we have slept with it as well. I have done. That is biofilm, right? And as you can imagine, it is very difficult to detach, and this is why this is so slippery as well. But this condition is also providing protection against the action of different disinfectants against this bacteria, and it provides protection as well against high pressure stream of water, etc. So it has been proved, and this doesn't only affect the pipes as well, that the bacteria creating colonies within biofilms are from 10 to 100 times more resistant against biocides. So not a joke. They can become extremely resistant, and this is very important. We have to bear that we have to bear that in mind, literally, especially when we are reading studies which have been published for the efficiency of certain biocides, because normally they are not tested against biofilm, right? They normally are just tested against suspended bacteria. But we know that in a real scenario, what we are going to fight and what we are going to find are biofilms, right? So we need to be aware of this, and especially careful in the food industry. We have to bear always in mind that these bacteria on the biofilm are going to be way more resistant. When we have performed field trials within the food industry, for example, we know Listeria is not resistant to any biocide when we find it on a planktonic way. And this is the same way as all these studies are performed, right? She is always going to be the first one to die on a study. But then within the food industry, we have seen that Listeria becomes probably one of the most difficult problems to get rid of. And this is because we will always find it within the biofilms. So a non-very resistant bacteria can become extremely resistant once it is placed within the biofilm. Obviously, it will provide protection for all those microorganisms that we will be aware of, but also it is going to interfere with the disinfectants that we are going to use, with the probiotics, or with the live vaccinations when we talk about the water, right? Well, in the poultry congress that took place in Valencia, it was proved that there is a high correlation between the capacity to generate biofilm from the bacteria, or just the presence of biofilm, and the positives for Salmonella. This is just an example that we found quite interesting. So the greater proportion of biofilm was, the greater proportion of positives for Salmonella was as well in the water deposits and in the drinkers. Also, there is an interesting article from 2019 where they did an in-farm study, and although the mechanisms used by Salmonella to persist are not well known, they certainly found that its capacity to generate biofilm was key for Salmonella to survive within different batches. So it was literally transmitted even after emptying the whole farm to get the next production, right? So it is, you can imagine how resistant it gets and how difficult it can be to get rid of if we are not using the right procedures. Also, with a very popular topic at the moment, which are the bacterial resistances within the biofilm, there are going to be different groups of microorganisms, and they can all relate to each other, as we said before, and they can transmit this resistance from one to each other. This is very important to bear in mind, as we can be promoting these resistances during the time and aggravating the problem, which is actually becoming a real problem in the population right now. How is it going to affect us? It will affect us well with blockages, right? We will find this a lot, especially in poultry production, and during the first days, even after adding some of these substances mentioned before into the water, like vitamins, sugars, that can act as a predisposing factor, and just in a short time they can trigger the biofilm, literally in a very short time. You already know the timings, so you can imagine. We have even seen some cases where the water flow literally stops completely. Obviously, you can imagine the problem that is going to be, because we might have our animals with no water for a period of time if we don't realize, and that can be a bit of a hazard. Important, when we are talking about incubators and hatcheries, it is important to bear in mind that we have a particular problem, which is Pseudomonas, right? I mentioned before already about Pseudomonas and the possibility to have only one bacteria. You have to know that normally Pseudomonas doesn't compete well with other bacteria. So if there are other ones, she's not the best one. But in these places like incubators and hatcheries, where we are paying special attention to have a really good quality water, and we have these osmotic filters to provide this quality into the water, which is going to maintain the humidity in the whole incubator. If by any chance we have a Pseudomonas getting in with no other bacteria in the environment that can compete with it, it normally will generate what we call a monofilm, right? It's a biofilm caused by only Pseudomonas. This is a problem because this Pseudomonas later on will be contaminating the eggs, even the young chicks, having all the related quality issues with the chicks. But as I said, this is just a particular case of incubators. Apart from it, in the reality, we have seen incubators with different kind of biofilms, even with plenty of different microorganisms there. But it will be quite normal to find these monofilms with Pseudomonas in the incubators. So now, how are we going to see if we have biofilm or we don't? This is very interesting, right? The most indicated way is to perform a water analysis in both the start of the line and also at the end of the water lines, in order to know if there is a greater concentration of microorganisms. We will see an example in a minute. We can also do surface sampling, and this is very interesting after cleaning and disinfection processes. And also we can do visual inspection, and by other ways, we will mention some of them. So here we have an example of a water analysis. Sorry, this one is in Spanish, but we will explain. If you remember from the first webinar where we were explaining this, we can already see a certain amount of aerobic mesophilic, total coliforms, E. coli, and Clostridium. This sample was taken in the origin, right, from the water. So we can imagine already that this water has some issues going on there, right? As you can see, it's not a very good quality one. But then we took another sample at the end of the line with this one. So we see that all the microorganisms in there are increasing number. Note, especially Clostridium, that gets multiplied 10 times. That means we have a beautiful and a mature biofilm inside the water lines. See E. coli as well, it gets multiplied 10 times. E. coli is another one that also finds mature biofilms very suitable. So see then how comparing these both analytics from the source and from the end of the water line can provide with a very good information to suspect that we have the biofilm going on. Obviously, we can also perform sampling, and as I said, highly recommend after cleaning and disinfection process to ensure that there is no biofilm left, or even that that it could be done as well inside of the pipes, more difficult, but it could be done if we can get access to the inside of the pipes in any place. There are also some color marking sprays, which are very useful because they are cheap and they are very quick. They are very useful to detect biofilm on surfaces. They are very used in the food industry, but if we want, we can use them as well inside of the farms. So now we already know how does it get formed, what are the predisposing factors, and how to identify it. The best way to fight it is to know what predisposing factors are we exposed to in our practical case, right? And try to deal with them. We are not talking about removing them, because in many cases we wouldn't be able to, but to understand them and, for example, knowing when it is the best time and how to provide, for example, a vitaminic supplement. Then we wouldn't give it during the first days where the water flows is lower. We talked about that before as well. Same with the temperature of the water. Just try not to add different predisposing factors that can lead to a biofilm issue together, right? Or we have the chance as well, if we have to do some, to use them associated with a biocide treatment that obviously is going to prevent the biofilm from happening. Then we will have different treatments to reduce the impact of these predisposing factors or to remove it once it is already there. In the cases, for example, of calcium and magnesium, we can use different methods to decrease the water hardness. With these ion exchange devices or resins, but this is not what we advise. For these cases where we have a hard water, we recommend to use biocides that can remove calcium or magnesium when you have this type of waters. Biocides that can dissolve that calcium and magnesium into the water, and that way it doesn't remain on the surfaces. It will not deposit and it will not stick there. This purpose can be achieved as well by adding acids into the water. The acidification in the water will dissolve as well the calcium and magnesium placed on the pipes and the drinker. So it can be very useful to use these sort of acids or peroxides in a continuous way to get rid of it. In the case of iron, we advise to remove iron from water. Literally, it's just that. There are very expensive systems to do it, which they act exchanging the iron and eliminating it through a circuit. But the idea and what we recommend are the aeration towers with pre-oxidation and precipitation, right? That way, most of the iron will be literally eliminated. And this way is very effective and much cheaper. I'm going to jump about this a bit quicker because I think we are running out of time. Anyway, if you want to do a question on this kind of aeration towers, just pass it to us and we will answer them. In the case of having old or deteriorated water lines, it's just replacing them. We have to replace any old piece of equipment that we have. Any old or deteriorated material will need to be replaced to avoid this formation of biofilm. The rough surfaces as well will be better to change them for a smoother one. And with the concrete, as I said before, if we can replace them for plastic or something like that, if not, we can use these paintings, right? The plastic or these epoxy paintings that will make the whole cleaning and process, cleaning and disinfection process much better. Obviously, again, reducing the use of nutritional substances into the water, and if we have to do it, let's do it combined with biocides into the water, and the closest that we can to the drinking point. That will make them only going through a shorter part instead of going through the whole water system. So obviously they won't be generating, if they do, biofilm into the whole place. So within the biocidal treatments, we have different options. The oxidation potential to remove biofilm is the following one for different active ingredients, right? Sorry for the Spanish chart, but I just wrote it in English on the other side, so you can see that hydroxyl radicals have the highest oxidation potential. So that is going to be the best option. Whereas iodine, which sometimes is added into the water, as you can see, it will not do much, to be honest. Chlorine dioxide can do something. It's not the best. Something will do, but still not a great action. Free chlorine, even a bit more, but the most effective, for sure, with the highest oxidation potential is going to be the hydroxyl radicals. We have to know that hydrogen peroxide has got itself 1.78, as you can see, oxidation potential, which is one of the highest. But also bear in mind that hydrogen peroxide with the silver added is a precursor of these hydroxyl radicals. And together, that radicals together with the hydrogen peroxide will be the most effective way to remove this biofilm. And now let's quickly talk about one of the most commonly used treatment, which is chlorine, and the issue that we can have with it. So in this case with chlorine, we are not going to go thoroughly through all of it, but I just want you to get with the idea that it doesn't remove biofilm, all right? So chlorine is not capable at all to go through the layer, the mucopolysaccharides layer. So once biofilm is already there, there is pretty much nothing that chlorine can make to remove it. It is not very persistent anyway, because it's highly volatile. And for this reason, it doesn't reach well to the end of the water lines. And we can find even more biofilm in the end of the whole water system, especially in larger, longer ones. But also bear in mind that using just chlorine can make biofilm even worse in the case of having hard waters. Chlorine will help calcium to precipitate and deposit into the pipes, making which is a soft surface, become rougher because we will have these deposits. That lime scale that we will see in the pipes when we work with hard waters, chlorine won't be able to do anything against it. And this is basically a mixture of different substances, but mainly calcium, which has been deposited. So as a summary for chlorine, let's just remember that it's highly volatile. It doesn't have a great efficiency. Also that it can increase the biofilm, in this case due to the precipitation of calcium. And also very important, and to me the main reason to not use chlorine is that it can cause irritation in the digestive tract of our animals, right? So what are we proposing you? We are working in two different ways at the moment, with a continuous treatment and a corrective treatment. Ideally, we always want to work in a continuous way. We have already seen the short time that is needed for biofilm to be generated and to go irreversible. So then we will be very exposed if we are working for example, 45 days with broilers, or even more, 90 weeks with laying hens, with very long cycles. And just doing a cleaning at the end of the production, we are going to be, as I said, kind of exposed. Remember that it can take literally from 20 minutes to 4 hours to go irreversible. So as I just said, working continuously with a low dosage will be ideal and will be quickly fighting biofilm as soon as it starts to get formed, and it will not let it grow. But the reality that we have faced is that sometimes there is already a problem in there with biofilm, and we have to act straight away, even in the middle of our production cycle. And then we will have to do a corrective treatment. And in that case, we will have to difference if we do it with the presence of animals or without the animals. This is very important. In the case of a continuous treatment, we advise using Aquasix, which contains hydrogen peroxide stabilized with silver added. These peroxides are food grade, and it also has got organic parasites together with the enterosix nucleus that will provide our animals with the digestive health. Then we will have different benefits with it. The first one will be a microbiological improvement of the water. This is very important to decrease the microbiological load and therefore the biofilm colonization process that we saw in the very beginning. Second, we will talk about biofilm removal due to its high capacity to remove any organic material. Besides, it does eliminate the calcium. Well, not eliminate certainly, but it does dissolve it into the water, so it's not going to let it precipitate. Remember that the calcium was one of the predisposing factors. And for last, it does provide with intestinal health. As we mentioned before, if we have to act straight away, if we have to do it in the presence of animals, let's imagine then the case of a laying hen farm, and then we perform a water analysis at the start and at the end of the line, realizing that there is a presence of biofilm there. So in that case, we want to treat it in the middle of the production cycle and then carry on with a continuous treatment. So we will have to give a higher dose for a few days with some precautions, obviously, because what is going to happen is that biofilm will be descaled by the hydrogen peroxide and will be drugged. So the animals will probably be drinking it, and we might have an increase of some digestive processes such as diarrhea. So we will be working on higher dose and trying to do fluorescence at the end of the line, and especially very important before the sun rises, to try to get all these druggings out before the animals start to drink. As I said, we will probably see an increase on enteric processes, but it will be later drastically reduced. So if we put it in the balance, it's worth it to do it if we already have a problem of biofilm and we have all the animals in there. I recommend to go from 150 to 250 milliliters every 1,000 liters of water, and 1 to 3 days, more or less. If we don't have the animals, which would be the other case, I particularly recommend to do the cleaning with peracetic acid with a dose from 1 to 2%, depending on the amount of biofilm that we will have. In the case of a hard water, you can even use a bit more. And as a recommendation, as there are no animals, just let it work for the whole night. And on the next day, just do a flush for the whole water system, right? Probably in the case of being working continuously with Aquasix Plus for the whole production, there will be no need to perform this kind of cleaning between batches. But if you are not using Aquasix continuously, I highly recommend to perform this at the end of every single batch. And for sure, in the case of laying hen farms, even if you are using a continuous treatment with Aquasix Plus, we will always advise you to do it at the end of each cycle, right? They are long cycles with a slow water flow, so the challenge is going to be higher. Sorry. In the case of cleaning and disinfection of surfaces, buildings, etc., I recommend you using 6-Virox. even though we are performing a good cleaning process, we have seen how resistant the biofilm can be. So it is very important that we are choosing a product of a high capacity, and that is why parasitic acid combined with hydrogen peroxide is going to be the greatest choice for this purpose, right? It has been proved that if we perform the cleaning process efficiently with the detergent, we will be removing up to an 80% of the microbiological load. So for that 20% remaining, which we can imagine that will be the most resistant, we have to choose a disinfectant which will be extremely effective under any kind of circumstance of presence of organic material, temperature, physicochemical conditions to literally just finish it and remove it all. Remember that within the biofilm, they can be from 10 to 100 times more resistant to disinfectants, as we saw before. So the one we choose for this purpose is 6-Virox. And this is all by me. I really hope you enjoyed the webinar, that you understand a bit better anything related with biofilm and all its predisposing factors, and that you found it useful for your particular cases. So thank you very much again. I haven't lost my voice. I pass it now to Carlos, and we will, I don't know if we have time to answer questions. If not, we will do it by email or anything, just that.